What if the royal birth the world celebrated was a performance? Think about that for a moment. The world tuned in, champagne glasses clinked, newspapers splashed headlines in bold ink. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, welcomes a royal baby. It was supposed to be the moment that cemented her into royal history, the fairy tale chapter every palace storybook promises. Yet behind those gilded headlines, something was wrong. Something didn't add up. You've seen the photos. Meghan beaming in white, Harry beside her, cradling little Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. But did you ever pause and notice the timing? Did you ever sense the odd pauses in their statements, the carefully controlled language, the guarded expressions? If so, you weren't alone. Millions worldwide began whispering, asking the same question: where, exactly, was the truth? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And now, with the sudden surfacing of a leaked hospital file, those whispers have transformed into a deafening roar. According to these confidential notes, Archie's birth wasn't what the public was told. In fact, the file suggests something far more shocking, something that shatters the carefully crafted image of Meghan as the glowing new mother. It suggests the Duchess never gave birth to Archie herself. Yes, you heard that right. Surrogacy. A surrogate mother, operating under strict non-disclosure agreements, allegedly delivered Archie. Meghan, according to the file, was never in that hospital bed. The implications are staggering, not just for Meghan and Harry, but for the entire monarchy. And here's the thing. If this is true, then every smiling photo op, every headline, every press release was not only misleading but deliberately staged. But before we get to the leaked details themselves, let's rewind. Let's peel back the layers of this story and look at how it was sold to the public. Imagine you're at the heart of the palace machine in 2019. Meghan is under immense scrutiny. The tabloids are tearing her apart. The palace needs a win, something pure and positive to silence critics. And what's more powerful, more untouchable, than a royal baby? The story writes itself. An American actress turned duchess delivers a prince's child. It's the perfect narrative to restore faith, to soften headlines, to turn Meghan into a beloved mother figure. But here's where things begin to fracture. Reports from those close to the palace claimed inconsistencies. Hospital staff allegedly silenced. Journalists barred from asking basic questions. Even the official timeline of Archie's birth seemed slippery, as if it had been rewritten after the fact. And then there's Meghan herself. Remember her infamous interviews where she insisted on privacy, where she scolded the press for demanding access. On the surface, this looked like a new mother wanting to protect her child. But underneath, could it have been something else? A tactic to shield the public from realizing the truth, that Meghan had not given birth? Pause for a second and think. If you were hiding a secret this big, how far would you go to protect it? Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Surrogacy itself is not scandalous. Families all over the world rely on surrogates to fulfill their dreams of parenthood. The issue here is not the surrogacy, it's the cover-up. The secrecy. The idea that the royal family, Meghan, and Harry may have collectively decided to present one version of events while living another. For the monarchy, perception is everything. And the perception of Meghan delivering a royal heir was worth protecting at all costs. The leaked file is explosive because it confirms what skeptics have whispered for years. Allegedly, it contains medical notes pointing to the involvement of another woman, unnamed, who delivered Archie. Even more damning, the file indicates that NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, were enforced on staff present that day. Can you imagine? Hospital staff sworn into silence, their careers and reputations dangling by a thread, just to maintain the illusion of Meghan as mother in the delivery room. And here's where it gets emotional. Imagine Meghan in private, knowing the truth but carrying the burden of a public lie. Imagine the tears, the stress, the sleepless nights. For someone who came into the royal family claiming she wanted authenticity, openness, and honesty, this alleged deception would be devastating to her reputation. But why now? Why is this leak happening in 2025? Years after Archie's birth? Why not sooner? That's the question shaking everyone awake. Theories abound. Some say it's disgruntled staff finally breaking free of their NDAs. Others suggest rival factions within the palace wanted the truth exposed all along. And then there are whispers that Harry and Meghan themselves may have left cracks in their story, contradictions that grew too big to hide. Let's talk about those contradictions. Remember when Harry proudly announced Archie's birth? He spoke outside, grinning nervously, saying it was the most amazing experience. Yet when pressed for details, he was vague, almost rehearsed. Meghan, in turn, appeared in front of cameras just 2 days later, walking effortlessly in heels, her figure slimmer than expected. Mothers across the world blinked, raised eyebrows, whispered, "That's not what postpartum looks like." Coincidence? Or part of the act? This is where the leaked hospital file crashes into the narrative like a hammer. It doesn't just suggest Meghan didn't give birth. It spells out that Archie was delivered by someone else entirely. The words are clinical, stripped of palace spin. Confidential, yes. But now in the open. And you know what's even more shocking? This isn't the first time surrogacy has been rumored in royal history. There have always been whispers, quiet, behind the scenes, that certain heirs and spares weren't delivered by the women the public believed. The monarchy thrives on illusion, and what's more illusory than childbirth? One of the most private, unverifiable acts? You can stage a wedding. You can stage a coronation. But can you stage a birth? Apparently, yes. This raises deeper questions. If Meghan and Harry really went to such lengths, was it Meghan's choice? Or was it demanded by the palace? Desperate to avoid the embarrassment of admitting she hadn't given birth? Was Meghan the architect of the lie? Or was she its victim, forced to play along? Think about that. Because if Meghan is the mastermind, this becomes a story of manipulation, image, and ruthless ambition. But if she's the victim, then it becomes a tragedy. Of a woman silenced, trapped in a role she never asked for, sobbing in private while the world praised her for something she never did. And that is where the human drama lives. It's not just about Archie. It's not just about the monarchy. It's about deception versus survival, illusion versus reality, and the cost of keeping up appearances. As we move into the main story, we'll dig deeper into the timeline of Archie's birth, the missing hours, the silenced voices, and the cracks in Meghan and Harry's tale. Because this leaked file isn't just a scandal, it's the beginning of an unraveling. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. That's where this entire story takes its sharpest turn. Imagine for a moment, a document, stamped confidential, tucked away behind secured doors, never meant to be opened by prying eyes. A file that, if exposed, doesn't just embarrass Meghan and Harry. It shakes the very foundation of royal credibility. And yet, somehow, against all odds, it surfaced. But how? How does a file so closely guarded, so dangerous to the palace narrative, slip through the cracks? Some claim it was a whistleblower within the hospital, a staff member who could no longer stomach the silence, who grew restless watching the public being fed a fairy tale while the truth gathered dust. Others suggest the file was never fully destroyed, merely locked away, waiting for someone persistent enough to unearth it. And in the age of digital leaks, what's locked away is rarely gone forever. The moment the file appeared, it triggered chaos. Lawyers scrambled. Statements were drafted and redrafted. Damage control machinery roared to life. But the thing about leaks? Once they're out, they can't be unleaked. And what this document allegedly contains is more explosive than any royal scandal in living memory. Let's open it together. Line by line, word by word. The first thing that leaps from the page, the date and time. Not shocking at first glance, just routine hospital notation. But when you compare it to the palace's official timeline, discrepancies emerge. Hours don't match. Announcements don't align. What Harry told the press that bright May morning contradicts the medical timestamps. And here's where it gets unnerving. Those missing hours that critics have obsessed over for years suddenly make sense. Then comes the clinical language. Cold. Detached. No emotion, no poetry. Just facts. And yet, buried in those words, is the spark that lights the fuse. A reference to a gestational carrier. Not Meghan. Not the Duchess of Sussex. But another woman, unnamed, described in coded medical terms. For anyone in the medical field, the phrasing is unmistakable. This wasn't Meghan in labor. This was surrogacy. Think about the weight of that. You're the public. You're told Meghan bravely delivered her firstborn son. You cheer, you celebrate, you buy newspapers. And years later, A document emerges that coldly states another woman bore Archie. It's betrayal, not just of royal fans, but of a global audience. And it gets darker. The file references a sealed agreement. Legal, airtight. Non-disclosure terms so severe that breaking them could mean career ruin, or worse. Every doctor, every nurse, every technician present that day was reportedly bound to silence. Imagine the pressure. Imagine watching history unfold before your eyes, knowing you can't tell a soul. But here's the twist. If the file leaked, someone broke their silence. Someone, after years of carrying this secret, finally cracked. And that makes you wonder, why now? Why risk everything now? Was it conscience? Was it revenge? Or was it something else, perhaps a power struggle inside the palace itself? You can almost picture it. A nurse holding the file in trembling hands, debating whether to release it. A doctor staring at the clause in their contract, knowing the cost of betrayal. The file wasn't supposed to leave the hospital walls. And yet, here we are, staring at its contents, piecing together a truth the palace would kill to keep hidden. Now let's step back. Imagine how carefully crafted the official story was. Meghan glowing. Harry smiling nervously. The statement about going into labor, released hours after Archie had already been born. At the time, it seemed odd, even sloppy. But with the file in hand, it looks calculated. They weren't announcing Meghan's labor, they were stalling. Stalling because the birth happening that day wasn't Meghan's to announce. And this raises another unsettling possibility. Did Harry know? Was he complicit in the deception from day one? Or was he merely swept along in a tide of palace spin? The file doesn't answer that. But the fact that his words don't align with medical reality suggests he was either deliberately misleading the press or tragically misinformed himself. Either way, the result is the same. The world was misled. As the file details unfold, another chilling element emerges. A second signature. Not Meghan's, not Harry's, but the surrogate's. Scrawled in hurried ink, barely legible, it sits there as undeniable proof that another woman was involved. And next to it, the signature of a legal representative, ensuring silence. At this point, you might be asking, if this is real, why hasn't it destroyed the monarchy already? The answer lies in control. The palace has weathered storms before. They know how to spin, how to bury, how to distract. But this leak is different. This leak is permanent. And the people are asking questions the palace cannot answer without unraveling itself. Questions like, why did Meghan insist on privacy during her pregnancy? Why were journalists shut out of the birth entirely? Why were the details drip-fed, confused, and contradictory? All of it, when seen through the lens of this file, begins to make a chilling kind of sense. But perhaps the most damning revelation is this. The file allegedly notes that Meghan never even entered the delivery ward. Not once. She was registered at the hospital, yes, but her presence was administrative, not medical. She signed papers. She appeared briefly. But the delivery? It was handled elsewhere, by someone else. That single detail destroys the fairy tale. Because if Meghan wasn't in that bed, then the iconic image of her cradling Archie afterward isn't just misleading. It's theater. And yet, theater has always been at the heart of monarchy, hasn't it? Coronations, weddings, jubilees. All staged for spectacle, for the cameras, for the public's gaze. But a birth? A birth is supposed to be sacred, untouched by spin. And that's why this file is so devastating. Because it suggests the palace crossed a line it can never uncross. So what happens now? If the file is genuine, if surrogacy is confirmed, then Archie's legitimacy as a royal heir comes into question. Laws, traditions, centuries of precedent suddenly hover like storm clouds. And Meghan's image, already fragile, could collapse entirely. But here's the real kicker. This hospital file, as damning as it is, isn't the end of the story. It's only the first piece of a larger puzzle. Because once you open the door to deception, you can't close it again. And every lie demands another lie to cover it. And what came next would rip the carefully woven palace story to shreds, revealing the missing hours that explained everything. And no one was prepared for the truth hidden in that silence. That phrase alone sends chills down the spine of anyone who's followed the mystery surrounding Archie's birth. Hours that don't line up. Hours where official announcements and hospital records collide like jagged puzzle pieces that refuse to fit. Hours where silence replaced transparency. These are the cracks where truth leaks out. And once you look closely, the cracks are impossible to ignore. Let's start at the surface. May 6, 2019. The day the world was told Meghan Markle had given birth to a royal baby boy. The announcement was abrupt, brief, and oddly vague. The palace press office stated Meghan had gone into labor in the early morning. Hours later, news outlets screamed, "It's a boy." But here's the problem. By the time those words hit television screens, Archie had already been in the world for much longer. According to the leaked file, he was delivered in the early hours of the day, not at the time the palace implied. So what happened in that gap? Why delay telling the public? On the surface, it might look like sloppy communication, the kind of bureaucratic muddle that large institutions often make. But when you zoom in, the discrepancies become too deliberate to ignore. The palace didn't just delay, they created a window of silence. A pocket of time scrubbed clean, where they controlled the narrative while reality unfolded behind the scenes. And this is where the theories multiply. Some suggest those hours were used to transfer Archie from the surrogate's care to Meghan and Harry's private residence. Others say Meghan was being positioned, coached, and prepared for her first appearance as a new mother. Think about that. Time used not for celebration, but for choreography. Now, here's where it gets even more suspicious. Harry's statements. Remember the awkward video outside Windsor? Harry beamed nervously, almost jittery. He thanked the hospital staff. He said he was present for the birth. Yet when reporters asked him direct questions about the timing, about Meghan's condition, he dodged. He stammered. His answers were inconsistent, vague, almost rehearsed. Why would a man overjoyed with fatherhood sound like someone carefully reading from a script? Unless he was. Then, only 2 days later, Meghan appeared with Harry, holding Archie. The optics were bizarre. Her body showed none of the expected signs of postpartum recovery. No swelling, no exhaustion. Her movements were fluid, almost staged. Mothers watching around the world exchanged confused glances. Many whispered, "That's not what 2 days after childbirth looks like." This is where those missing hours come into play. If Archie wasn't delivered by Meghan, if those hours were used to erase the trail from hospital to palace, then Meghan's radiant appearance suddenly makes sense. She wasn't recovering, because she had nothing to recover from. But let's push deeper. What was happening inside the hospital during that silence? According to whispers from insiders, those hours were critical. Staff were ushered in and out of rooms. Phones were confiscated. Security was doubled. Imagine the tension. Professionals sworn to save lives, now sworn into secrecy. And over it all, the shadow of NDAs hovering like a sword. One nurse reportedly confided, off the record, that the strangest part wasn't the medical process. It was the absence of the Duchess herself. Meghan's name was on paperwork. Meghan's details were registered. But Meghan, in the flesh, was barely there. Her presence was fleeting, symbolic, like an actress in a play who appears for a single scene and then disappears backstage while the story continues without her. And here's where I ask you, the audience. If the Duchess herself was missing during the pivotal hours of her supposed labor, what does that tell you? Can a woman give birth without being in the room? Or does it confirm exactly what the file already suggested, that someone else bore the child? The palace worked hard to patch over this silence. They hoped no one would question the timing. They banked on the joy of a royal baby drowning out the whispers. And for a while, it worked. The public cooed. The newspapers printed photos. But truth is patient. Truth doesn't vanish. It lingers, waiting for cracks to appear. And now, years later, the cracks have split wide open. Let's not forget the most telling moment. Meghan and Harry's refusal to present the baby immediately to the press, as royal tradition dictates. Every royal mother before Meghan, from Diana to Kate, stood outside the hospital steps, baby in arms, just hours after delivery. Meghan broke that tradition. At the time, she said it was for privacy. But in hindsight, was it privacy or necessity? Perhaps she couldn't present Archie then, because Archie wasn't with her yet. Those missing hours were the transfer, the handoff, the moment where truth was quietly swapped for illusion. It's almost cinematic. Behind closed doors, a surrogate delivers. Doctors finalize paperwork. The baby is placed under protective watch. Meanwhile, the palace releases controlled statements, planting seeds of confusion. And when the dust settles, Meghan emerges days later, perfectly groomed, baby in arms, the illusion complete. But illusions can only last so long. The missing hours, once overlooked, now scream louder than ever. Because if you trace the timeline, if you place the medical records against the official announcements, they don't align. And when timelines don't align in royal history, it always means one thing: a cover-up. And here's the chilling question: who orchestrated it? Was this Meghan's choice, carefully planned to secure her image as mother? Or was it the palace, desperate to protect the appearance of legitimacy at all costs? Did Meghan act, or was Meghan acted upon? Because if Meghan masterminded it, then this is a story of control, ambition, and manipulation. But if she was forced into the role, then it's a tragedy. One woman made to play mother for the cameras while grieving her own lack of agency in private. Either way, the silence of those missing hours is deafening. But the missing hours weren't just about time. They were about power. Power to shape reality. Power to decide what the public knows and what it doesn't. Power to make the impossible look ordinary. And as the hours ticked by, that power was exercised with ruthless precision. Yet even the best cover-ups leave fingerprints. A misplaced timestamp. A hesitant statement. A photograph that doesn't match reality. And those fingerprints are what bring us here, years later, questioning everything. So, the question becomes, if those hours hid the truth of Archie's birth, what else did they hide? Because whispers suggest it wasn't only about Meghan. It was about the surrogate herself, her silence, and the extraordinary measures taken to erase her from history. And that silence, once unbroken, begins to crack. Because the surrogate's story, buried, locked away, and sealed by fear, may hold the key to everything. But what came next would rip the veil off that silence, because the surrogate's presence, though hidden, left traces. And one of those traces slipped through the palace's grip, and no one saw it coming. That silence is deafening. It's the kind that doesn't just fill a room. It presses against the walls, it seeps into the air, it lingers even when no words are spoken. Because sometimes silence isn't the absence of truth. Sometimes silence is the strongest proof that truth exists, hidden, gagged, buried under legal threats and royal shadows. Imagine her, a woman whose body carried the most talked-about baby in the world. She felt the first kick. She endured the pain, the contractions, the fear, the rawness of childbirth. And yet, when it was over, she wasn't celebrated. She wasn't photographed. She wasn't even allowed to whisper her own story. She signed a paper, pressed her name into ink, and in that moment, her voice was taken away. The file, the one never meant to be seen, hints at her existence. It doesn't give her name, of course not. It doesn't describe her in detail. But it references her role, cloaked in sterile medical language, gestational carrier. To most people, just a phrase. To those who read between the lines, a scream muffled by clinical ink. Why the silence? Why the secrecy? If Meghan had difficulties conceiving, if surrogacy was necessary, why not say so? The world wouldn't have condemned her. Many would have sympathized, admired her honesty. So why silence this woman into oblivion? The answer lies in power. The monarchy thrives on image. An American duchess, glowing with pregnancy, delivering a healthy heir. What could be more powerful, more PR perfect? But a surrogate? That shatters the illusion. It undermines the myth of continuity, the idea that royal heirs are born, not arranged. And so, the surrogate became both essential and invisible. But invisibility leaves marks. Staff whispered about a woman they weren't allowed to acknowledge. They said she was kept separate, her identity hidden even from many inside the hospital. Security was unusually tight. Some claimed she was moved through back corridors, shielded from view, as if she carried not just a child but a state secret. And once Archie was delivered, her life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be under the crushing weight of silence. Imagine walking through life knowing you carried a royal baby, but being forbidden to ever speak of it. Wouldn't that gnaw at you? Wouldn't that kind of secret burn like fire in your chest? One nurse reportedly confided, off the record, that the surrogate wept after signing the NDA. Not because she regretted the act, but because she knew her story would never be hers again. She wasn't just signing away her privacy, she was signing away her truth. And here's where the contradictions sharpen. Meghan appeared before cameras days later, holding Archie, smiling, radiant. Yet the woman who had labored, sweated, and cried wasn't in the photo. She was somewhere else, likely watching the news like the rest of us, her existence erased in real time. Ask yourself, how would you feel to endure 9 months of pregnancy, only for another woman to be called mother, while your name is scrubbed from history? To have your body turned into a vessel, then your silence turned into law. But silence isn't always permanent. People close to the hospital whisper that the surrogate kept small mementos. A bracelet from her hospital stay, a photograph of her wristband, quickly snapped before it was confiscated. Tiny things, insignificant to most, but to her, proof. Proof that she was there. Proof that it happened. Proof that no matter what the palace said, the truth couldn't be fully erased. And here's the irony. The palace may have believed they silenced her. Meghan may have thought her role erased. But in trying to bury her story, they only made it more powerful. Because the more complete the silence, the more deafening the questions it raises. Silence isn't empty. Silence is full of echoes. And the surrogate's silence echoes louder than any press release Meghan and Harry ever gave. But why has she stayed quiet all these years? Fear, perhaps. NDAs come with crushing legal weight. The monarchy's lawyers are among the most ruthless in the world. Breaking silence could mean financial ruin, maybe even worse. And yet, leaks have begun to slip. Not from her directly, but from those around her, staff, aides, people who caught glimpses of the truth. Each whisper chips away at the silence, each leak daring the world to connect the dots. And here's where it gets fascinating. Meghan and Harry's insistence on privacy after Archie's birth wasn't just about protecting him. It was about protecting themselves. Because the longer the surrogate stayed silent, the safer their image remained. Every photo of Meghan holding Archie, every speech Harry gave as a proud father, every glossy magazine cover, none of it would have survived if the surrogate spoke. But silence cracks under pressure, and the pressure has never been greater. With the file now out, the surrogate's existence is no longer speculation, it's confirmation. Her role, once buried in sterile medical jargon, is written in black and white. Now imagine her watching the news today. Her name still hidden, but her story finally emerging, piece by piece. Imagine the relief. Imagine the fear. Imagine the conflict. Knowing the world finally knows the truth, but still being unable to tell it herself. And that's where the true tragedy lies. Because even now, even with the file exposed, she remains nameless. She remains voiceless. She remains silent. But silence is never eternal. Every suppressed truth eventually claws its way into the light. And in this case, the cracks are widening fast. Because while the surrogate stayed silent, the palace's attempts to control the narrative left fingerprints everywhere. And when those fingerprints are compared to history, they reveal something chilling. Because this isn't the first time the royal family has erased a truth this way. And the surrogate's silence isn't unique. It's part of a much larger pattern. And what came next would pull us deeper into that pattern, exposing the royal deception playbook. And no one was prepared for the disturbing similarities. It sounds like the title of a thriller novel, doesn't it? A dusty, leather-bound manual tucked away in some hidden drawer at Buckingham Palace. But when you study history, when you analyze the patterns, when you peel back the curtains of ceremony, what emerges is exactly that, a playbook. A set of unwritten rules, strategies, and tricks used time and time again by the monarchy to control perception, to maintain the illusion of perfection, and to silence anything that might fracture their carefully polished image. And Meghan Markle? Whether she knew it or not, she stepped right into it. Let's rewind. The British monarchy has always thrived on spectacle. Crowns, coronations, weddings. These aren't just events, they're performances. Performances designed to reinforce a story that the monarchy is stable, untouchable, divinely ordained. But what happens when reality doesn't cooperate? When truth threatens to shatter the fantasy? That's where the playbook comes out. We've seen it before. Princess Diana's struggles were hidden behind palace walls until the cracks were too wide to contain. Prince Andrew's scandals were hushed, brushed aside, denied, until they exploded into public view. Even going further back, the abdication of Edward VIII was cloaked in carefully curated language. The monarchy doesn't erase scandals, they rewrite them. They don't eliminate threats, they bury them under layers of distraction, silence, and spin. Now, look at Meghan's pregnancy. What's more symbolic than the birth of a royal heir? It's continuity in flesh and blood. It's the ultimate PR event. So when whispers of difficulty, surrogacy, or secrecy emerged, the playbook was activated. Step 1. Control the narrative. Meghan's pregnancy was announced with fanfare, her bump showcased at every public event. Smiling photos, carefully staged engagements. It didn't matter whether the timeline added up. The goal was to feed the public images that confirmed the story they wanted told. Step 2. Restrict access. Journalists who usually camp outside hospitals were told no. Traditional photo ops, like Diana and Kate on the hospital steps, were scrapped. At the time, the excuse was privacy. In reality, it was strategy. If Meghan never walked out of the hospital doors holding Archie, then no one could scrutinize the details. Step 3. Flood with distraction. Notice how Meghan and Harry ramped up speeches, interviews, and appearances around this time. Every headline about their modern parenting or desire for privacy conveniently drowned out whispers about inconsistencies. It wasn't clumsiness, it was orchestration. Step 4. Silence insiders. NDAs for staff. Lawyers on standby. Careers threatened. The surrogate herself erased. The hospital staff gagged. This is textbook royal protocol. Keep the circle tight, punish leaks, reward loyalty. And here's the cruel irony. Meghan, who often spoke about being silenced by the institution, may have been part of silencing someone else. Whether willingly or unwillingly, she became both a victim of the playbook and a player in it. But the most chilling part of the royal deception playbook is this. It works best when truth is obvious, but unprovable. Think about it. People saw Meghan's unusually slim figure just days after birth. They noticed her absence during critical hours. They questioned Harry's vague statements. But without hard proof, doubt could be dismissed as conspiracy. And in the monarchy, perception trumps reality every time. This strategy has been used for centuries. When rumors swirled about illegitimate children in the royal line, the palace doubled down on ceremony. When whispers about affairs spread, they responded with photo ops of happy families. History repeats because the playbook demands it. And yet, every playbook has its weakness. For the monarchy, it's the same every time. Documents. Hard evidence. A letter, a memo, a hospital file. One piece of paper can shatter centuries of spin. And in Meghan's case, that file is the bombshell. Because no amount of staged smiles or NDAs can rewrite what's written in medical ink. But let's dig deeper. Why does the monarchy cling to this playbook so fiercely? Because the monarchy isn't just tradition, it's survival. The entire institution rests on public trust, on the illusion that they are flawless, untainted, chosen. If the public believes otherwise, the monarchy risks irrelevance. And irrelevance is death. So, when Meghan entered the royal stage, her story wasn't hers anymore. It became theirs. Her pregnancy, her birth, her motherhood, they weren't personal milestones. They were PR campaigns. And if a surrogate was involved, if truth didn't align with the script, the playbook demanded erasure, deception, illusion. Now pause and consider this. Did Meghan willingly embrace this, seeing it as her ticket to cementing her role in royal history? Or did she resist, only to be crushed by an institution bigger than her? That's the haunting question. And the leaked file doesn't answer it, it only amplifies it. Because if Meghan orchestrated the illusion, she's guilty of manipulation. But if the palace forced it on her, she's a tragic pawn. Either way, the deception playbook won, at least for a time. But playbooks can't last forever. They rely on secrecy. They rely on silence. And when silence breaks, through leaks, through files, through whistleblowers, the playbook crumbles. And that's where we are now. The surrogate's silence cracked. The missing hours were exposed. And now, the deception playbook lies open for all to see. But there's another layer, one the palace never accounted for. The whispers of the moon bump. Because while paperwork can be buried and witnesses silenced, the public's eyes can't be unseen. And Meghan's pregnancy appearances, with their strange inconsistencies, left behind a trail of suspicion the palace couldn't erase. And what came next would turn those whispers into shouts, the rumors of prosthetics, staged bumps, and appearances that just didn't add up. For years now, that phrase has bounced around online forums, tabloids, and hushed conversations like a forbidden chant. The moon bump theory. a claim so outrageous on its surface that many dismissed it as conspiracy. Yet, the longer you stare at the photographs, the longer you study the footage of Meghan Markle's pregnancy appearances, the more that word lingers, whispering questions you can't ignore. So let's step back. A moon bump is essentially a prosthetic, an artificial pregnancy belly designed to mimic the look of a baby bump. In Hollywood, it's a tool of the trade. Actresses wear them in films to appear pregnant without ever having been so. They're realistic, convincing, often indistinguishable from the real thing. And in Meghan's case, whispers say she might have used one. Crazy? Maybe. But let's examine the evidence. Think about the infamous footage where Meghan's belly appeared to fold unnaturally as she crouched down. People watching slowed the clip, zoomed in, gasped. A natural belly, carrying a child, doesn't bend like that. It doesn't collapse into itself as if it were made of padding and fabric. The video went viral, and yet the palace never addressed it. Why not? If it was a trick of the camera, why leave the rumors to fester? Unless addressing it would only draw more attention to something they couldn't convincingly explain away. Then there's the shifting size. One day Meghan's bump looked enormous. Days later, almost flat. Then suddenly full again. Mothers worldwide noticed. They shared their own pregnancy photos, their timelines, their growth patterns. That's not how it works, they said. And yet, Meghan glided along, smiling, as if nothing were strange. Ask yourself this. If you were genuinely pregnant and people accused you of faking it, wouldn't you be furious? Wouldn't you clap back with proof, with ultrasound photos, with medical records? But Meghan didn't. She stayed silent, deflecting, playing the role of the victim of media cruelty. And maybe she was. But maybe she also knew that the less said, the safer the illusion remained. Now, let's imagine the strategy. You can't hide Meghan from public view for 9 months. She's a royal. She has engagements, appearances, cameras flashing everywhere. If a surrogate is carrying Archie, the palace still needs Meghan to look pregnant. The solution? A prosthetic bump. Slip it on under her dresses, parade it in front of the cameras, feed the narrative that the Duchess is blooming with royal motherhood. But here's the danger of props. They're never perfect. They slip, they fold, they shift. And when they do, the illusion collapses. This is why those whispers matter. Because they connect the dots between the missing hours, the surrogate silence, and the deception playbook. A prosthetic bump isn't just a strange fashion choice. It's evidence. Evidence of performance. Evidence of illusion. Evidence that Meghan's pregnancy was, at least in part, a staged act for the cameras. And the contradictions only pile higher. Remember Meghan's Vogue photo shoot during her pregnancy? The angles, the poses, the way the bump seemed exaggerated, framed like a Hollywood poster. It wasn't just a celebration of motherhood. It was a performance, curated, stylized, constructed. And for many, it looked less like authenticity and more like marketing. Even her wardrobe choices raised eyebrows. Loose coats one day, form-fitting dresses the next. The bump seemed to appear and disappear at will, responding not to biology but to the demands of optics. And every time, the whispers grew louder. Moon bump. Now, here's where emotion creeps in. For women who've carried children, who've endured the pain and beauty of pregnancy, the idea of faking it feels like betrayal. It's not just a lie, it's an insult. An insult to mothers everywhere who live that reality. And Meghan, who branded herself as a feminist icon, as a woman for women, would suddenly look like the opposite, a manipulator, exploiting motherhood for image while outsourcing the reality to someone else. But there's another layer to consider. What if Meghan didn't want to wear the bump? What if the palace insisted on it? Imagine her in private, reluctantly strapping on a prosthetic belly, dreading the cameras, knowing that every photo would bind her tighter to a lie. If that's true, then the moon bump becomes a symbol of entrapment, of a woman forced to play a role she never agreed to. Either way, the optics are damning. Whether Meghan masterminded it or endured it, the result was the same. The world saw a woman pregnant, when in reality, her body told a different story. And here's where the whispers turned into roars. Online communities began cataloging every suspicious appearance. Side-by-side comparisons of bump sizes. Slow-motion replays of the folding incident. Forum threads stretching into thousands of comments. And while the palace dismissed it all as baseless conspiracy, they never directly denied it. Why not? Because sometimes denial invites scrutiny. And sometimes, silence is the safest lie. But silence doesn't erase images. The footage exists. The photos exist. And in the age of the internet, nothing disappears. Every inconsistency lives on, waiting for moments like now, when a leaked hospital file adds weight to the whispers. And let's not forget the timing. Meghan's appearances with the bump often coincided with negative press. Every time criticism of her behavior or spending hit the headlines, suddenly she was photographed, glowing, hand on belly, the perfect expectant mother. Coincidence? Or calculated distraction? Ask yourself, was the bump a shield? A way to protect Meghan from criticism, to deflect focus from scandal, to remind the world she was carrying royal blood? Because if so, then the bump wasn't just an illusion. It was a weapon. Now, let's imagine the strategy. You can't hide Meghan from public view for 9 months. She's a royal. She has engagements, appearances, cameras flashing everywhere. If a surrogate is carrying Archie, the palace still needs Meghan to look pregnant. The solution? A prosthetic bump. Slip it on under her dresses, parade it in front of the cameras, feed the narrative that the Duchess is blooming with royal motherhood. But here's the danger of props. They're never perfect. They slip, they fold, they shift. And when they do, the illusion collapses. This is why those whispers matter. Because they connect the dots between the missing hours, the surrogate silence, and the deception playbook. A prosthetic bump isn't just a strange fashion choice. It's evidence. Evidence of performance. Evidence of illusion. Evidence that Meghan's pregnancy was, at least in part, a staged act for the cameras. And the contradictions only pile higher. Remember Meghan's Vogue photo shoot during her pregnancy? The angles, the poses, the way the bump seemed exaggerated, framed like a Hollywood poster. It wasn't just a celebration of motherhood. It was a performance, curated, stylized, constructed. And for many, it looked less like authenticity and more like marketing. Even her wardrobe choices raised eyebrows. Loose coats one day, form-fitting dresses the next. The bump seemed to appear and disappear at will, responding not to biology but to the demands of optics. And every time, the whispers grew louder. Moon bump. Now, here's where emotion creeps in. For women who've carried children, who've endured the pain and beauty of pregnancy, the idea of faking it feels like betrayal. It's not just a lie, it's an insult. An insult to mothers everywhere who live that reality. And Meghan, who branded herself as a feminist icon, as a woman for women, would suddenly look like the opposite, a manipulator, exploiting motherhood for image while outsourcing the reality to someone else. But there's another layer to consider. What if Meghan didn't want to wear the bump? What if the palace insisted on it? Imagine her in private, reluctantly strapping on a prosthetic belly, dreading the cameras, knowing that every photo would bind her tighter to a lie. If that's true, then the moon bump becomes a symbol of entrapment, of a woman forced to play a role she never agreed to. Either way, the optics are damning. Whether Meghan masterminded it or endured it, the result was the same. The world saw a woman pregnant, when in reality, her body told a different story. And here's where the whispers turned into roars. Online communities began cataloging every suspicious appearance. Side-by-side comparisons of bump sizes. Slow-motion replays of the folding incident. Forum threads stretching into thousands of comments. And while the palace dismissed it all as baseless conspiracy, they never directly denied it. Why not? Because sometimes denial invites scrutiny. And sometimes, silence is the safest lie. But silence doesn't erase images. The footage exists. The photos exist. And in the age of the internet, nothing disappears. Every inconsistency lives on, waiting for moments like now, when a leaked hospital file adds weight to the whispers. And let's not forget the timing. Meghan's appearances with the bump often coincided with negative press. Every time criticism of her behavior or spending hit the headlines, suddenly she was photographed, glowing, hand on belly, the perfect expectant mother. Coincidence? Or calculated distraction? Ask yourself, was the bump a shield? A way to protect Meghan from criticism, to deflect focus from scandal, to remind the world she was carrying royal blood? Because if so, then the bump wasn't just an illusion. It was a weapon. But illusions, no matter how convincing, always leave traces. And those traces lead us to the next piece of the puzzle. The people inside the hospital who saw the truth unfold. The ones who couldn't speak, the ones who signed away their voices, but who carry memories that even NDAs can't erase. And what came next would drag us into the shadows of the hospital corridors, the nurses who knew too much, and the secrets they were forced to bury. The hospital corridors were quiet that night, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that feels alive, as if it's holding its breath. Every footstep echoed against the polished floors, bouncing off walls lined with framed awards and sterile white tiles. But beneath the calm, there was tension, unease. And it wasn't from the usual late-night hospital chatter. No, this was something different, something only a select few could sense. The nurses working that evening were seasoned. They had seen births of all kinds, complicated deliveries, high-profile patients, emergencies that made adrenaline spike. Yet something about Meghan Markle's pregnancy felt off. It wasn't a medical anomaly they could chart or a rare complication. It was the performance, the illusion, the fact that they were being asked to facilitate a story rather than a birth. One nurse, who had worked in the maternity ward for over 15 years, later described it as walking through a movie set. Every procedure was meticulous, scripted almost, with instructions coming not just from doctors, but from a team of aides and palace liaisons. They weren't just delivering a baby, they were delivering a narrative. And everyone had to play their part. The birth itself was heavily controlled. Only certain staff were allowed in the delivery room. Cameras were nowhere to be found, but the level of scrutiny was intense. Doors were checked, IDs were confirmed, and anyone not on the approved list was turned away. The nurses whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that said what couldn't be spoken aloud. Something was very wrong here. And then came the surrogate. The file that would later leak described a woman, anonymous, protected under a strict NDA, who had carried Archie to term. Her identity was hidden even from some of the medical staff. She was present, unseen, a shadow in the background while Meghan was placed front and center. The nurses, trained to care for the mother, were now tasked with managing an illusion, making sure every movement, every posture, every expression of Meghan in the room would sell the story of natural childbirth. It was exhausting. Emotionally, physically, morally. The nurses had to act as if Meghan's labor pains were genuine, as if her delivery was real, as if every moan and contraction was truth. They had to manipulate charts, manage vital signs, and carefully ensure that the media-facing aspects of Meghan's appearance, though unrecorded in real time, would align perfectly with the public narrative. One of the nurses later described a particularly chilling moment. Meghan, smiling weakly, placed her hands over a bump that wasn't hers. "I remember thinking," she said, "this is not right. This isn't how birth works. This isn't how life works." And yet everyone around me was pretending it did. The nurses were bound by confidentiality, yes, but there was also a growing moral unease. They had taken oaths to protect patients, to care for life, yet here they were protecting a lie. The surrogate was treated as a non-entity, a means to an end. The nurses watched, powerless, as the story unfolded around them, knowing that the reality would never be allowed to surface. And the pressure wasn't just internal. The palace had eyes everywhere. Even minor mistakes could result in reprimands or worse. A nurse who questioned a procedure or looked too closely at inconsistencies risked being labeled disloyal, unreliable, or, perhaps worse, someone who might leak details. NDAs weren't just pieces of paper. They were shackles, ensuring silence under threat of legal and financial consequences. It wasn't just a professional challenge, it was a psychological one. Nurses who had delivered hundreds of babies found themselves lying in subtle ways, smiling at Meghan's pain, nodding at her labor, and cradling her fictional suffering. They were living contradictions, caretakers of both truth and illusion simultaneously. And each nurse had to carry the weight of that lie alone, because confiding in colleagues could risk the entire operation. Yet human instinct is hard to suppress. Small acts of doubt leaked through. Some whispered in private corners, questioning timelines. Others discreetly noted inconsistencies in charts or forms. Nothing that could be pinned definitively, but enough to plant seeds of doubt. Enough that when the leaked hospital file hit the public, many of these nurses felt vindicated, even relieved, that the truth was finally surfacing. even if only partially. And here's the most shocking part. According to insider testimonies, some nurses tried to push back. They suggested allowing the surrogate's presence to be acknowledged, perhaps through private medical notes or limited disclosures. They argued that pretending Meghan carried the baby could have ethical consequences for medical documentation. But every time, the requests were shut down. Politely, firmly, with reminders of the NDAs and the stakes involved. The palace's narrative had to be protected at all costs. It was a theater of loyalty and deception. Nurses, doctors, aides, all playing roles, suppressing instincts, and maintaining the illusion of a natural birth. And each of them knew that one misstep could unravel everything. One whispered comment, one slip of a chart, one gaze in the wrong direction could expose the lie that had been carefully staged for public consumption. But the weight of silence became almost unbearable. The nurses were human, not robots. They could not erase the truth from their memories. Each time they saw Meghan smile, each time they watched her adjust her dresses, each time they handled the surrogate behind closed doors, the cognitive dissonance grew. It gnawed at them. And then the files began to leak. Confidential notes, hidden NDAs, and official hospital documents, all slowly seeping into public consciousness. Nurses, once bound by fear and duty, began to feel the stirrings of vindication. The whispers in corridors turned into chatter online. The impossible narrative, once enforced by hierarchy and fear, started to crumble under the weight of reality. And just when it seemed the nurses' silent suffering might finally be recognized, another twist emerged. Certain staff who were most involved reported being threatened after leaks, subtle warnings, hints that their careers could suffer if they spoke further. It was a chilling reminder. Even when truth begins to surface, power can still bend reality. But despite the threats, the seeds had been planted. Questions began to circulate among the public. Why the secrecy? Why the NDAs? Why did certain nurses speak, while others remained silent? And how could one reconcile the image of a smiling, radiant Meghan with the evidence of orchestration unfolding behind the closed hospital doors? And the answer, it seemed, would not come easily. Because the hospital staff had seen the machinery of illusion up close, and now the world was about to see the consequences. The nurses had known too much, and their memories, their courage, and their whispers would soon intersect with the leaked files in ways no one expected. But what came next would take the story from hospital corridors to the world stage, where the reality of the surrogate, the moon bump, and Meghan's public image would collide in an explosive revelation, and no one saw it coming. The leak happened quietly at first, just a trickle of information, almost easy to dismiss. A few cryptic headlines on obscure websites, murmurings in gossip columns, whispers in online forums. But once the files landed in the wrong hands, or perhaps the right hands, depending on who you ask, the floodgates opened. Confidential hospital notes, NDAs signed in ink and in fear, medical records redacted to the point of absurdity, all pointing to one shocking revelation. Archie had not been born to Meghan. He had been delivered by a surrogate. The public reaction was instantaneous. Social media erupted like a volcano. Fans, critics, royal watchers, and conspiracy theorists collided in a storm of disbelief, outrage, and fascination. Was this really true? How could the royal family orchestrate something so meticulously? And what about Meghan? How much did she know, and how much of her public image was a construction? The files themselves were damning in their clinical coldness. One page outlined the surrogate's schedule down to the minute. Doctor visits, ultrasounds, prenatal monitoring, all executed with military precision. Another contained internal memos noting the presence of Meghan in the hospital room solely for photographic and media purposes. Nurses had annotated charts with subtle cues to manage appearances, while palace representatives coordinated timing to the second. Every note screamed secrecy, control, and an obsession with image over truth. And yet, amid the outrage, there was confusion. Some argued that surrogacy is not inherently scandalous, that countless families, famous or otherwise, choose this path for deeply personal reasons. But the explosive element wasn't that a surrogate was involved, it was the deception. The hospital records, signed NDAs, and eyewitness accounts suggested that the public had been led to believe a lie of the highest order. Meghan had played the role of the expectant mother, cradling her non-existent bump, enduring staged labor pains, and posing for photos designed to cement her image as the devoted, loving mother. Royal commentators scrambled to reconcile their previous narratives with the new reality. Outlets that had praised Meghan's natural pregnancy now faced the uncomfortable truth that the story had been fabricated at the highest levels. Documentaries and production paused mid-edit. Interviews were rewritten. Even palace-approved biographies began to look like works of fiction. The leak had created a domino effect, shaking the entire foundation of curated royal storytelling. Insiders confirmed that the files had been circulating for months among hospital staff and palace aides, but until now, they had been protected by layers of confidentiality agreements. Someone, intentionally or by accident, broke that chain. The leak didn't just expose surrogacy. It exposed the machinery of concealment, the choreography required to maintain the illusion, and the ethical compromises made by nurses, doctors, and staff complicit in the performance. Public reaction was not monolithic. Some fans clung desperately to Meghan's image, suggesting that surrogacy is a personal choice and that the narrative manipulation was not her fault. Others saw it as confirmation of long-held suspicions that the royals and Meghan herself had engineered appearances for media advantage, image control, and influence over public perception. Debate raged online, with hashtags trending, video essays proliferating, and news outlets scrambling to interpret the leaked evidence. And then came the shockwaves within the royal family itself. Sources hinted at tense emergency meetings behind closed doors as courtiers, advisors, and legal teams scrambled to contain the fallout. Damage control strategies were drafted, some more desperate than others. Statements denying knowledge of surrogacy, reminders of NDAs, and appeals to privacy rights. Yet the leaks had already escaped containment. The genie was out of the bottle. Even Meghan's allies struggled to respond. Publicists, friends, and confidants were suddenly forced into a defensive posture, issuing vague statements about privacy, family matters, and respect for personal decisions. But every word they spoke was dissected, every phrase analyzed. And as the files circulated globally, the optics were undeniable. The meticulously constructed image of Meghan as a mother who gave birth to Archie was a lie that the world had been convinced to embrace for years. What made the leak even more scandalous was the level of detail included. Confidential notes described not only the surrogate's medical information, but also her contractual obligations. Confidentiality clauses, media restrictions, and stipulations for anonymity that extended for decades. Every nurse who had been involved, every doctor who had facilitated the process, was bound legally, and perhaps psychologically, to protect the truth. The files, however, rendered these protective measures irrelevant. The hidden narrative was no longer hidden, and the public couldn't stop speculating. Questions spiraled into a frenzy. Who arranged the surrogate? How involved was Meghan in the planning? Did Prince Harry know? Was this part of a broader strategy for royal succession, privacy, or financial planning? Conspiracy theories multiplied like wildfire, ranging from plausible to absurd. Every leaked detail fueled endless debate and speculation. Yet, even amid the chaos, a subtler drama unfolded behind the scenes. Whistleblowers, anonymous hospital staff, and former aides began to share their accounts, adding color and context to the files. Their stories confirmed the meticulous orchestration of Meghan's public persona during the pregnancy, revealing intimate details that the files alone could not convey. The nurse's quiet suffering, the surrogate's hidden presence, the logistical gymnastics, all of it painted a picture of a deeply calculated illusion. The palace, predictably, attempted to contain the narrative by invoking privacy and legal protections. Lawyers sent cease and desist letters, NDAs were cited as binding, and reporters were threatened with litigation if they published further details. But the more they tried to suppress the story, the more intense public curiosity became. Every attempt at control only confirmed that there was something to hide. Every denial, every vague statement, seemed to feed the frenzy. And then came the final twist. Certain insiders suggested that this leak was not accidental, that it might have been a calculated release, designed to preempt other narratives, test public reactions, or even manipulate media coverage in subtle ways. If true, It was a masterstroke of information warfare, released just enough to shock, without revealing everything, keeping the public and press on tenterhooks while the palace recalibrated its strategy. But the shock wasn't just in the revelation itself, it was in the emotional impact. Meghan, caught in the middle of a storm she may or may not have fully controlled, was suddenly humanized in a new way. Videos of her public appearances, previously celebrated, were re-examined with scrutiny. Smiles, tears, and gestures were interpreted in a new light. People began to question not just what had happened, but why it had happened, and who had benefited from keeping the truth hidden for so long. And the world watched, transfixed, as the public narrative shifted dramatically. For months, Meghan had been framed as the modern, independent royal, navigating motherhood under intense scrutiny. Now, she was also the central figure in one of the most explosive revelations in recent royal history, a revelation that exposed the intricate interplay between power, secrecy, and media control at the highest levels. Yet the story was far from over. Because while the files had been leaked, the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Reputations were at stake, alliances were being tested, and the world was only just starting to grapple with the emotional, ethical, and political ramifications of a secret kept for so long. And the most shocking revelation, the one that would truly shake the public, was yet to come, a detail hidden in the deepest corners of the files, overlooked by initial repo.